Okay, in 10.3 now we're going to talk about p-values. And a p-value is the probability of seeing observed data or something like it given the null hypothesis. So a low enough p-value says that we might be able to, quote, reject the null hypothesis. So again, the null hypothesis is what we believe to be the underlying truth of whatever situation we're dealing with. And then we're either going to reject that, our basically our going in assumption, or we're going to fail to reject. So, and a p-value kind of gives us the cutoff for which case do we say reject the null hypothesis or fail to reject the null hypothesis. And we'll see that you have to really decide what the p-value should be. And a p-value is just a number. So it's going to be a number like 0.10, 0.05, 0.01. It'll be something like that. And we'll see that it can relate to probabilities and percentages and things like that. So we see this all the time in court cases in America where we assume that we say that the defendant is innocent until proven guilty. And so basically if we think about a p-value in that situation, a p-value would be like the defendant says I'm innocent, but then we find a a uh, a murder weapon with their fingerprints on it and some of their blood on it and some of the victim's blood on it, and we say, if the null hypothesis is true, which is this person is innocent, isn't this evidence very unlikely? And that's exactly what it is. So this evidence would be very, very unlikely given that the defendant is innocent. And so what juries have to decide is that evidence enough to say, boy, this is so unlikely that our going in assumption that the person is innocent is probably incorrect. And what that would mean is then, okay, this evidence would be very likely or very probable if this person was not innocent. And so that's what they have to decide. And basically they have to either fail to reject so they either have to reject the null hypothesis that the person is innocent, or they fail to reject the null hypothesis and say that they're not guilty. Now that's also we have to be very careful about our wording here. Because when they fail to reject the null hypothesis, that does not ensure that that person is innocent. All it means is that they do not have enough evidence to reject the null and say that they're not guilty. So we cannot prove innocence. We cannot ever prove our null hypothesis. We can only reject it or fail to reject it. Okay, and then we have some examples here, and we'll go into this more because can be a very kind of tricky thing. So again, the key here is we can never prove anything. We can't say anything's true. All we can do is either reject our going in assumption, the null hypothesis, or fail to reject it and say we don't have enough evidence to think otherwise. So a very low p-value provides evidence against the null hypothesis. Well, that's true. So, and again, we're going to decide how low that is. So, do we want to be 10% right, 5% right, or 1% right? Or I should say 5% of the time wrong, 10% of the time wrong, 1% of the time wrong. And so this p-value will change depending on our situation. But typically a very low one means we have to reject that null. So again, in the murder case, if you've got all this evidence placing the person at the scene of the crime, well then would be awfully rare given that they're innocent. So we would say, well, we have to reject that, and we would say they're not innocent. And B, a high p-value is strong evidence in favor of the null. So this is false because a high p-value, so a low p-value we reject the null. A high p-value means we fail to reject the null. It does not mean that the null hypothesis is true. And it's a subtle thing, but that's basically the gist of this one. Just because we fail to reject it does not make the null hypothesis true. A p-value above 0.10 shows that the null hypothesis is true. Well, this is just like the other one. This one's even worse. They're saying is true. Never can we say that. So no, a p-value, no matter how high it is, does not guarantee the null hypothesis to be true. If the null hypothesis is true, you can't get a p-value below 0.01. So again, these are percentages, so this is false. This can happen. So basically, the p-value kind of tells us how often we could be wrong. So if the p-value is 0.01, we might still be wrong 1 in 100 times. And what that means is we might actually convict an innocent person 1 in 100 times. So we have to be very cognizant of what we should pick for a p-value to make sure that we don't either convict an innocent person or let a guilty person go free, right? And so we'll talk more about that. And that should do it for 10.3.